one is sanctions socialism. According to the Council on Hemispheric Affairs in 2016, the primary purpose of sanctions is to provide a platform for negotiation between President Raul Castro and the State Department. Per NPR explains in 2009, sanctions have forced members of the Cuban elite into a position where change must happen internally, trading domestic reforms for cutbacks to the American embargo. Already, DW indicates Castro's proposed over 300 reform projects, while rhetoric of the Council on Foreign Relations details in 2016, Cuba has begun liberalizing key parts of its state-controlled economy, tripling the island's number of self-employed workers in 4 years. However, Suchliki of the University of Miami writes in 2013, abruptly lifting the embargo would remove our best and only tool for pushing policy change in Cuba. With no leverage, Castro has no reason to listen to our demands. Contention 2 is economic electrocution. Cuba's financial policy is one of gradualism. The National Security Council explains in 2012, Cuba is slowly adopting liberal policies to ensure an eventual reconciliation with the U.S. Unfortunately, the long-term agenda remains fragile, and too much change too quickly would derail its trajectory. In response to these recent reforms, the U.S. has warmed up to Cuba without fully lifting sanctions. According to Schwartz of the Wall Street Journal in 2016, over the past few years, the U.S. has eliminated the travel ban, increased banking ties, and permitted exports of technology, food, and medicine, all while keeping the embargo in place. Steele of Harvard University writes in 2014 that for Cuba, this gradual growth in trade with Western nations is preferable to the sudden jump the embargo would bring because it allows Cuba to enact key domestic reforms in fiscal policy that must be implemented before Cuba can succeed in the global economy. Huff Barrett of the Peterson Institute confirms in 2014, if capitalism is to rapidly replace state ownership in Cuba, large corporations would be the first to take advantage of the Cuban economy out of competing underdeveloped domestic businesses. These Western monopolies would then fiercely resist reforms and lobby against expanding workers' rights. Schertzer of the Havana Times confirms in 2016, opening the floodgates to Cuba would fuel a wave of corporate imperialism, with MNCs taking over public lands, lobbying for deregulation, destroying labor unions, and driving down wages. For example, in the agricultural sector, Altieri of UC Berkeley writes in 2016, 300,000 small farmers in Cuba would be outbid for land and outperformed in production by large transnational corporations, pushing them into poverty. Beyond monopolization, Gonzalez furthers, the Cuban government would pass austerity measures known as structural adjustment policies in a frenzy to attract badly needed institutions of capital and obtain debt relief from institutions like the International Monetary Fund. These policies would drastically reduce government spending on education, healthcare, pensions, and other programs. Unfortunately, one of the best social welfare systems in the hemisphere, Barretti of the London School of Economics contends in 2015 that Cuba's education, healthcare, and pension programs are the nation's best tools in fighting poverty. This electrocution of Cuba's economy will have dire consequences. Author Naomi Klein writes, when Chile entered the global economy unprepared, unemployment increased 6 times over, and when Uruguay and Argentina did the same, average wages fell by 28 and 40% respectively. Policy analyst Phil Taggart continues that in Peru, structural adjustment policies ultimately led to a monopolization of the economy that increased petrol prices 30-fold and staple food prices 11-fold. Worse than unrestrained economic downturn in Cuba will lead the Castro regime to reverse reforms and increase repression. Kemp of the University of Edinburgh writes that in the 1990s, a financial crisis in Cuba led the government to crack down in order to reassert control. Economic cataclysm in Cuba spills over to the rest of the world. Bateman of The Guardian writes in 2016, the changes Cuba makes in the years ahead will not only determine its own economic success, but will also reverberate across the global south, where many developing countries are in similar economic straits, seeking a way out. If one nation fails, they may all fail together. On all fronts, rapid globalization is not the answer, and thus we strongly urge a negative ballot.
Can I say quiet before I vote?
Foreign firms and financial institutions are prohibited from trading with the United States if they choose to University of Lagos concludes that every 1% increase in foreign direct investment results in a 1.24% increase in GDP. The ability of economic growth to help the poor is unambiguous. The Economist quantifies in 2013, finding that every 1% increase in GDP reduces poverty by 1.3%. Second, increasing opportunity. By increasing the available capital for businesses to work with, foreign investment improves conditions for workers. Kingomi of the International Labor Office quantifies in 2002 that every $1 million in FDI results in an additional $31,200 people employed. In addition to improving the absolute quantity of employed people, the Moody of the University of Remy-Champaign finds in 2016 that a 1 standard deviation increase in FDI increases per capita income by 0.08 percentage points. This helps the poor. Christina Weiser of Yale University finds in 2011 that every 1% increase in per capita income reduces poverty by 3.1%. Third, ameliorating material deprivation. Selma Castrati of American University writes in 2013 that by fostering competition for businesses, accelerating human capital formation, and driving down costs of businesses, foreign investment increases the availability of goods and services for residents of the host country. Ultimately, Christina Weiser of Yale University finds in 2011 that every 1% increase in foreign investment decreases poverty by 0.76%. Fourth, promoting sustainability. Because influxes of capital pay for more equipment and cleaner energy, foreign direct investment promotes environmental sustainability. For example, Junwon Lee of Boston University finds in 2015 that every 1% increase in FDI decreases CO2 emissions by 0.017%. All in all, Kankiri of Kankiri University finds in 2012 that in the long term, high amounts of foreign investment promote environmentally sustainable economic development. Argiolo Maldonado of the Association for the Study of the Cuban Economy writes in 2014 that in order to combat Cuban poverty in the long term, environmental sustainability is of critical importance. Fifth, restructuring the economy. Copeland of Oberlin University writes in 2011 that while Cuba has the human capital necessary to support a strong industrial sector, it lacks the startup capital. An influx in investment would remedy this disparity, ushering in a new era of industrial growth. Empirically, Rita Jaworczyk of the American Economic Review finds in 2004 that a 1 standard deviation increase in foreign investment increases productivity in the industrial sector by 15%. In addition to being a key employer of low-skilled workers, industrial growth drives down the cost of manufactured goods. As a result, increased growth reduces poverty. Abhay Arande of the University of Peradeniya uses Malaysia as a case study and finds that every 1% growth in the manufacturing sector reduces rural poverty by 0.33% and urban poverty by 0.9%. More generally, Novella of the Hellborough Economic Research Institute confirms in 2007, writing that industrial growth is a prerequisite to long-term economic prosperity and poverty reduction. Thank you. Please.
So why do Cuban people need gain? They're living at $20 a month, that is correct. But why is that bad? No. Why is poverty in Cuba bad?
Less money, less ability to buy stuff.
Buy what?
Less ability to buy goods, food.
They can buy food perfectly well. Yeah, they can.
Like material deprivation in Cuba is a huge issue. I think
No, you just assert that. You don't tell me why. Like right now, they have a higher life expectancy than we do in the U.S. They're very happy there. In terms of food. No, this is from like full fact. It's very trustable.
In general, like poverty, material deprivation in Cuba is a huge
No, it's
issue.
not. No. If you didn't read evidence about that yet, if Malcolm's going to do that, that's fine. But as it stands right now, I don't think that there is a deprivation in terms of their necessities in Cuba. I would agree that they can have iPhones there. And if that's what your impact is, that's fine.
Advocate that like regardless of what you want us to do about food right now, in the long term in order to like promote development.
That's again just statistics that are not specific to Cuba.
Wrong. Like in case we read specific like evidence, and he'll get in order to promote sustainable like.
That's about the environment.
Oh,
right. Sustainable poverty reduction. But still, your definition of poverty is how much income Cubans have. And that's how I'm going to argue that income has nothing to do with how people in Cuba are.
That's not true. We're also talking about material deprivation, but we're moving in circles.
Okay, but I want Malcolm to talk about what materials are deprived.
Okay, so are you going to defend status quo?
Yes. Yeah. Okay, so your fourth subpoint talks about like sustainability, right? But I didn't catch a warrant there. Why does FDI increase environmental sustainability?
The warrant is you buy more efficient and cleaner technology and equipment, and you can use that technology to promote development in a sustainable manner.
So better tech from like outside, that's the okay.
So, like, on your contentions about, like, slowly promoting these changes, is the ultimate goal of this, like, have trade liberalization and, like, open relations?
Yes, but I would not, okay, let me explain that though. Max and I, our position in this round is not that we should definitively lift the embargo like 10 or 20 years down the line. We're just saying that right now, with the information we have about the Cuban economy, lifting the embargo is not an advisable thing.
Like, you want
That may
to
change.
over time,
No, that may change. And we'd argue that the status quo is a movement towards liberalization. But we're not putting a time frame on this. We don't even have an advocacy in terms of
Regardless of whether you want to put a time frame on it, just clarifying that so everyone hears, right? Ultimate goal is trade liberalization, right?
Moving in that direction, yes. But like we can win the round if we show that trade liberalization is bad too. Like if we just say that like the embargo is bad.
Advocating trade liberalization.
Yeah, okay, fine.
You
Like,
just say that you're advocating
no.
trade liberalization.
That's my point. We're advocating for the status quo, whatever that is. Like right now, we're like softening relations between the U.S. and
Ultimate
Cuba,
goal is
but
trade
there's no.
liberalization, right?
That's not necessarily what the status quo is. We're not sure what the embargo is going to be lifted.
Let me know when you're doing. The judge said there'll be 2 overused applicants. Okay. Probably not. Yeah, the first one's short, the second one you can just call on the case. Yeah. Go ahead.
Literally 3/4 of their impact rolling cards are not Cuba specific. Either one, you don't evaluate them, or two, you let us do the same. Second, FDI undermines progressive reform in 2 ways. First, Baramo of NYU in 2015 fined that FDI undermines democracy and democratic institutions as foreign national companies work with the government to ensure that they are protected and these citizens are not. But moreover, Bob at Texas Tech University explains that authoritarian regimes use FDI to privatize the distribution of public government services, appeasing dissent, buying out challenge, and insulating the regime from criticism. He concludes that a 1% increase in FDI decreases the probability of democratic reform by 43%. That structurally solves back almost all the problems in the case because reform solves for everything that they talk about. On growth. First, Benitez of U.S. News finds in 2016 that the Castro government forces all foreign companies to issue wages in hard currency to the Cuban government, which translates into a 92% income tax on the people. Money does not fall to the poor. Second, Bernanke of Buffalo University explains that if Cuba experiences high rates of FDI, it will become dependent on volatile foreign capital. Unfortunately, because investors usually overestimate the economic potential of untapped markets, money is often pulled out rapidly, which as a result increases volatility and hurts the poorest members of society most. The IMF confirms that for every 1 standard deviation increase in FDI, income inequality rises 2.7%, while the Shah of the University of Karachi similarly explains that for every 10% increase in foreign inflows, poverty increases 4%. But this turns their internal link because all of their evidence relies on a long-term increase in FDI, not a short-term, and a reversal of that, which in turns all of their arguments. On jobs, the first thing you recognize is that Cuba's unemployment rate is 1.6%. The problem is not the quantity of jobs, the problem is the quality of jobs. Unfortunately, the Institute of Economics in 2014 finds that FDI harms job quality in 2 ways. First, FDI undermines human capital development by ensuring that jobs are only granted to high-skilled individuals, keeping people in poverty. Second, investors lobby against workers' rights regulations for lower wages because they don't want to pay more. Third, Castrati American University Index in 2013 that increases in FDI were principally responsible for the creation of sweatshop labor in Asia, as corporations prefer minimum cost of production and maximum output. That is not a quality job. If anything, it makes the jobs worse. Then, on product accessibility, there are other developed countries that trade with Cuba. They concede this. This means that goods and services from the first world should intuitively have already been provided. Either the link isn't true or their impact is negligible. But second, American corporations uniquely push the prices of products up. The University of North Carolina in 2000 writes that multinational corporations can underprice local firms, drive them out of business, and once the competition disappears, they jack up prices one more time, which first of all not only means their impacts in the short term, but in the long term it means that they can't afford anything in Cuba. Then on the environment, first, they don't tell you how much Cuba emits right now. Second, a chart of the Journal of Economic Development in 2009 finds that in the short term, FDI inflows increase pollution, emissions, and resource depletion by ramping up production. In the long term, the pollution of the level country also increases because FDI-led expansion of economic activities in dirty sectors like oil and mining also increases, which is why Yang of the University of Southeastern China apparently confirms in China a 1% increase in FDI led to an increase in industrial emissions on net by 0.1%. Finally, increasing FDI restructures the architecture of Cuba's economy to become more environmentally injurious. Acidio of the University of Kansas in 2006 finds that FDI entrenches resource dependency because FDI often goes to these sectors of the economy that countries have more resources in the context of Cuba. This means more oil. Halston of Brookings in 2009 finds the U.S. Geological Survey estimated in 2009 that Cuba has 5.5 billion barrels of untapped offshore oil. However, Mario, the diplomat, writes in 2016 that the embargo limits the industrial equipment, that the island can afford reducing Cuba's oil production to just 5% of its potential. If and when investment increases, Cuba's oil production will increase 20-fold. Unfortunately, more oil means more repression. Ross of the World Bank in 2011 producing over $100 of oil per capita reduces the likelihood of democratization by 3-fold. And no country with high levels of oil production has ever successfully gone from a dictatorship to a democracy that they turn on their case because the structural problems remain. On manufacturing, inflow of FDI drops prices, discourages local producers, and a 10% increase in FDI inflow reduces domestic production by 7%. But finally, this is really important. Their impact, the cumulative impact of this is poverty. They did not tell you why poverty matters. In a socialist country where the government provides literally everything, it gives you food, it gives you water, shelter, healthcare, and education, which is why Hamlin wise from the Atlantic in 2016 that Cubans have the same life expectancy at 10 cost, they have a food surplus, they have enough medical health care, they don't need money for anything. Their entire impact is not unique because they don't need to reduce poverty in the nation.
Please come up. What's on my case? Everyone's good? Okay. Oh.
Sort of the fifth impact of industrialization. He lies to you and he says we don't need Cuba-specific evidence, we give you the Copeland evidence, which is very clear in saying that Cuba would have a strong industrial sector, even have these startup capital that it needs. That's what foreign direct investment does. At the end of the day, we're showing you when you have these startups, you create an industrial sector in Cuba, which they would have if they have this capital to build factories. That's really critical because that evil evidence, which they don't address, says literally no country has been able to lift its citizenry out of poverty or raise their standard of living without first industrializing. It's a prerequisite to having a well-off society. Every time they tell you that you don't care about poverty, he's wrong. You care about standard of living, which is functionally the same as a poverty impact. If we tell you that people have more money, it's still better. He says they don't need more money, but it might be nice to have more money. Let's go to their case. Their first contention talks about stopping reform, 3 ways you turn it. First, Cuba needs money to reform. The Economist explains in 2016 that Venezuela's recent economic choice has weighed Cuba down, causing Castro to slow down his agenda of cautious economic reform. The incentive to reform is already there because the government wants to do it, but they need cash to actually implement those reforms because implementing policy is fairly expensive. What that means is that when you increase foreign direct investment and give money to the government through these state-owned businesses, they're able to pursue the reform they want to pursue. But second way you turn it is that lifting the embargo means it's more influence down the line to make Cuba more democratic. The Cuban study group finds in 2017 continued engagement with Cuba would allow the U.S. to influence positive change when Castro steps down and Diaz-Canel steps up. Because in 2018, Diaz-Canel will be looking to cultivate international legitimacy, so he'll comply with us. But third, lifting the embargo changes the political landscape of Cuba. Vasquez of the Cato Institute writes in 2014 that economic engagement with Cuba will produce constituencies of middle-class citizens who will lobby for political reform. Now, go to the second intention of electrocution. 3 overall responses, then I'll go bit by bit, so it's really 3 arguments. So, overall, first, there's a huge contradiction because their goal in this contention is eventual liberalization. But he reads you a whole card-dump rebuttal about how liberalization is bad, make them pick, or just what's going on there? But secondly, gradualism is a half-term failure for Cuba because 5 of the Brookings Institution argues in 2015 that unless the fledgling private sector we see now is saved by foreign direct investment, it will literally collapse within the next few years, putting us back where we started before any reform. But third thing is that lifting the embargo would overwhelm the Cuban government's ability to maintain control of the economy, so lots of investment at once is good because it solves back for authoritarianism. Came up in the New York Times in 2012 that lifting the embargo would bring in a huge amount of cash, which would overwhelm the government's bureaucracy. They wouldn't be able to stop it from going to the private sector, and a free market would emerge. Let's go to the first part of this contention, which is the Scherzer and Alcieri argument on how you get outbid for land by these large MNCs. They're missing the point here, right? It's a global market, there is competition. At the end of the day, other MNCs will also be bidding and employing people, which cause them to raise standards of living and raise costs for workers. The global food market is just too big for anyone to monopolize. And at the end of the day, their argument is functionally unreasonable. Second argument here, I lied, it's actually 2 arguments, not 3, is the structural adjustment argument from Gonzalez. A couple of things that are important. First, you can only get an SAP, a structural adjustment program, if you join the IMF, which Cuba will never do, because unsurprisingly, socialists really don't like the IMF. Maldonado, the Association with Studying the Cuban Economy, explains that Cuba refuses to deal with international financial institutions for ideological reasons, which don't change when you lift the embargoes. But second, also, SAPs aren't used anymore. You turn the argument. According to the IMF in 2012, they're using a new policy for poverty strategy reduction papers, or PSRPs, which happen to be really good, because nerve University of Oslo Bruback claim that PSRBs to replace SOPs are really effective at promoting democratization, which is probably good for Cuban law grant. Here's how the map breaks down. They have a huge contradiction when they tell you that trade liberalization is bad, because that's also the eventual goal of their case. But if you want government reform, or if you want a better future for Cuban people, you are affirming to give Cuba the capital it needs to reform and further those reforms, and also just to raise standards of living by creating an industrial sector in the economy. Our Copeland evidence is very specific in saying that Cuba has, human capital needs to create this sector. It needs the dollars, the influx of investment in this sector.
Ready? So your Cuba study group evidence says Diaz-Canel will comply with us. So if I call for that evidence, it's going to say Diaz-Canel will comply with us.
This is a little more interesting Diaz-Canel takes power, and then I make the analysis that he's more against the natural.
That's the issue that I have, right? If you want to comply with us more than Raul, Raul didn't really want to comply with us, how much of a marginal benefit are you getting?
Some. Can I ask you a question?
No, I'm going to weigh some.
It's more than none.
How do you
Your side has none because you don't comply. Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about your card dump. So you tell me that FDI is really a terrible thing.
Yeah.
What happens when Cuba reforms and liberalizes?
It allows for a climate zone.
Which then guess what? Like from businesses around the world, what do they get?
I mean, our argument is that it is better for the Cuban
You're
people.
not answering my question. What do they get when the private sector eventually emerges?
Freedom is our argument. That the government doesn't have to regulate every single one of
Wait, so all of your FDI cards, all of the cards in your level by FDI is bad are contingent on state-run economies?
I mean, just that FDI.
If I call for all
Wait. No. My carding about FDI is contingent on FDI. I'm confused as to
right,
what you're
but
asking.
when there's eventually liberalization, which your case defends, as Rebecca pointed out in first crossfire, don't your harms also happen?
I mean, no.
Why not? It's
Wait,
also
so
FDI.
our argument is that like a closed socialist economy is still preferable to one of the free enterprise that's open
You
to
have,
people.
you have two arguments, and they contradict. Your first is that we want gradual liberalization, and your second is that liberalization is bad. That's all.
No, that's fine, right? So our argument is that, yes, private enterprise is good, but no, that opening it up to the world economy is bad.
Great, private enterprise is good. We agree on that.
Yeah, and control protections for fun, yes.
Private enterprise is good. People should write that down. You have a question?
Yeah, so let's talk about, I forgot the slide on the, I think it was the vast evidence, right, about the middle class?
Yeah.
So if 40% of Cuba's population is already classified in the middle class, how much more does that need to expand to figure it as?
The classification is sort of arbitrary, right?
And then how do you classify it?
Based off in order to have a middle class, there needs to be also a lower number class.
Yeah, and
it's just
40% of Cuba is middle class.
Well, then it gets bigger.
Okay, and that's why I was my question from the start. How much bigger does it need to get?
35. So, let's talk a little bit about your argument. You say there's no unemployment, right?
1.6%.
So, 1.6% unemployment. If there are more job openings, but only still the same number of people, what happens?
I mean, that was our argument, right? That's the quality of jobs.
Great, yeah.